A record executive sat in London with two young guitar groups in front of him. One came from Liverpool, one came from Dagenham. He chose the local boys. That decision became one of the most infamous mistakes in music history, because the group he rejected was the Beatles. But here is the part people forget. The band he chose was not a joke. They scored a UK #1 before most beat groups even knew how short the spotlight could be. Their singer walked away, and everyone expected the backing band to vanish. Instead, they came back without him and hit #1 again with Silence is Golden. They had 11 UK top 10 singles. They turned Cat Stevens, Bob Dylan, and the Four Seasons material into pop gold. Then, just when they finally proved they were more than the answer to a trivia question, they tried to become serious, heavier, self-written, respected. And that is when the audience began slipping away. The chart numbers are real. The Decca decision is real. The split is real. What still hurts is not that they were chosen over the Beatles. It is that after all those hits, after all those harmonies, after surviving the loss of their frontman, they were still trapped under another band's shadow. This is the real story of the Tremeloes, the band pop history remembers for the wrong reason. And before it ends, one of their own biggest victories will become the very move that helps break them. Chapter 1. The Local Boys. Decca chose. Before the Beatles' shadow ever touched their story, the Tremeloes were just a group of boys from Dagenham, a working-class town in Essex, trying to catch the sound moving through Britain. The band formed in 1958, when British rock and roll was still finding its shape. Brian Poole became the singer, partly because he had the look. He wore glasses, and that gave him a touch of Buddy Holly, one of the heroes young beat groups looked up to then. Around him were the players who would carry the name further than most people expected. Westwood on lead guitar, Blakley on rhythm guitar and keyboards, Alan Howard on bass, and Dave Munden on drums. At first, the name was simple enough, the Tremeloes. But once Decca Records entered the story, the label pushed the frontman forward. The group became Brian Poole and the Tremeloes, which sounded normal for the time, but it planted trouble early. One man got the spotlight. The band carried the weight behind him. Then came January 1st, 1962. At Decca Studios in West Hampstead, the label heard another young group audition. They were rough, nervous, and nowhere near the polished force they would soon become. They were called the Beatles. Decca turned them down and signed Brian Poole and the Tremeloes instead. That one choice became one of the most repeated stories in pop history. For the Beatles, it became part of the legend. The rejection before the explosion. The door slammed shut before the world opened. For the Tremeloes, it became something else. A blessing that slowly turned into a trap. Because here is what gets lost. Decca did not choose a band that vanished the next week. The Tremeloes were not nobodies. They were not some embarrassing footnote. They could sing, they could play. They had the clean look, the local advantage, and the kind of stage act a label could understand. But history can be cruel that way. Once the other band becomes the Beatles, everyone standing near the decision starts looking smaller. In the beginning, though, none of that mattered. The local boys had the contract. They had the name. They had their chance. And for a while, they made Decca look right. Chapter 2. Brian Poole and the First Taste of Fame. The first version of the band worked because Brian Poole gave audiences an easy face to remember. He was young, neat, and familiar enough to sell the group without scaring anyone's parents. Behind him, Westwood, Blakley, Alan Howard, and Dave Munden supplied the sound that made the records move. Their first major breakthrough came in 1963 with Twist and Shout. The song was already tied to the new beat group Explosion, but Brian Poole and the Tremeloes made it work for their own crowd. In the UK, it reached #4, which was not a small result. It proved Decca had not signed an empty promise. Then came the real hit. Do You Love Me reached #1 in the UK in 1963 and stayed there for 3 weeks. Think about that for a second. The band many people remember only as the group chosen instead of the Beatles actually had a chart-topping record of its own, while the British beat boom was catching fire. Success changes the room. Suddenly, the boys from Dagenham were not just local hopefuls. They were a real pop act with fans, television appearances, and pressure. Every follow-up mattered, because a #1 hit does not just open a door, it raises the ceiling and shortens everyone's patience. They kept the run going. Candyman reached the UK top 10 in 1964. Someone climbed even higher, reaching #2 that same year.
I was loved by no one.
For a band supposedly living under the shadow of a bad Decca decision, they were building a serious chart record. The billing, though, still told the audience where to look. Brian Poole was the name in front. The others were the Tremeloes behind him. That setup can work while everyone is climbing together. It becomes harder when fame starts whispering different things to different people. The singer wonders if he is the reason the records sell. The band wonders if anyone hears the work underneath the voice. The audience may love the whole sound, but the industry often sees only the face. By 1965, the split was coming. Brian Poole decided to leave and chase a solo career. On paper, it made sense. His name had been on the records. He had been the boy at the front. If anyone was supposed to survive, it was him. The music press seemed to think the same thing. Poole was expected to continue. The Tremeloes were expected to fade. That was the obvious story. It was also wrong. Chapter 3. The backing band refuses to die. When Brian Poole left, the Tremeloes faced the kind of problem that destroys many groups before they ever get a fair second act. They had lost the voice at the front. They had lost the name the public knew. Worse, they had to prove they were not just the men standing behind somebody else's career. For Rick Westwood, Alan Blakley, and Dave Munden, the choice was simple but brutal. They could accept that the old story was over, or they could rebuild the band from the floor up. Alan Howard was still part of the early post-Poole picture, but the lineup soon shifted. In May 1966, Howard was replaced by Mike Clark, and only a few months later, Len "Chip" Hawkes came in. That change mattered. Chip Hawkes brought a new presence and helped the band move into its next shape. But the comeback did not happen cleanly. Their early post-Poole single "Blessed," written by Paul Simon, failed to give them the lift they needed. Then, after moving to CBS Records, they recorded "Good Day Sunshine,"
Good day, sunshine.
a song from the Beatles album Revolver. Radio played it, but the record still did not chart. There was a bitter little irony in that. The band, haunted by the Decca Beatles story, had now tried a Beatles song, and even that had not saved them. At that point, plenty of people would have quietly filed the Tremeloes away as another beat group that had lost its moment. The frontman was gone. The first comeback attempts had missed. The 60s were moving fast, and pop music did not wait around for wounded bands to find themselves. Then came "Here Comes My Baby." Written by Cat Stevens, the song gave them exactly what they needed: a bright, catchy record that did not sound like a band begging to return to the past. In 1967, it reached #4 in the UK. After the doubts, the failed starts, and the loss of the man whose name once came first, the Tremeloes were back in the top 5. That was more than a hit. It was a correction. Suddenly, the old assumption cracked. Maybe Brian Poole had not been the whole story. Maybe the band behind him had its own sound, its own instinct, and its own reason to exist. The cruel twist is that Poole's solo career faded by 1967, just as the Tremeloes were finding their strongest form without him. The backing band had refused to die, and now they were about to make the record that would define them. Chapter 4. Silence, Gold, and the Peak. Nobody expected. The next record changed everything. Silence is Golden had already existed before the Tremeloes touched it. Bob Crewe and Bob Gaudio wrote it, and the Four Seasons had recorded it as the B-side of Ragdoll. But in the hands of the Tremeloes, the song found a different kind of life. Their version leaned into softness, harmony, and ache. It did not need to shout. That was the trick. In May 1967, Silence is Golden entered the UK chart. Then it climbed all the way to number 1, stayed there for 3 weeks, and remained on the chart for 15 weeks. That was the moment nobody could wave away. This was no longer Brian Poole's old backing group trying to survive. This was the Tremeloes standing on their own, with a number 1 record that belonged to the new version of the band. Rick Westwood, Alan Blakley, Dave Munden, and Chip Hawkes had not just replaced a frontman, they had rebuilt the machine. The hits kept coming. Even The Bad Times Are Good reached number 4 later in 1967.
There are times in this life of mine, I think that just
Suddenly You Love Me reached number 6 in 1968.
treat me like you do. Who could trample on my pride and play a
Helule Helule followed. Then My Little Lady gave them another UK top 10.
my little lady? You can make me son of
For a while, they had exactly what most bands spend their lives chasing: a clear sound, a loyal audience, a run of records that kept their name alive in shops, on radio, and on television. Their strength was not danger, it was polish. They sounded warm, clean, and easy to invite into the house. In a decade that was getting louder, stranger, and heavier, the Tremeloes offered bright popcraft and smooth harmonies. That made them hugely effective. It also boxed them in. The same thing that made them successful made it harder for them to be taken seriously as artists. They were winning with outside songs, strong arrangements, and a friendly image. They could turn other people's material into hits, but respect in rock was starting to move somewhere else. By the end of the 60s, bands were expected to write, experiment, and sound as if they had something heavier to say. And the Tremeloes could feel that change coming. They had survived the loss of Brian Poole. They had escaped the Decca joke. They had proved they were more than somebody else's mistake. Now they wanted something more dangerous than hits. They wanted respect. Chapter 5. The Victory That Turned Against Them. By 1969, the Tremeloes were no longer content to be treated as a polished pop group with pretty harmonies and outside songs. That frustration made sense. They had earned their place. Silence is Golden had gone to number 1. Here Comes My Baby and even The Bad Times Are Good had reached the UK top 5. The group had survived a frontman leaving, a label change, failed comeback singles, and the ugly little cloud of being linked forever to the Beatles' Decca rejection. After all that, they wanted to show people they were not passengers in their own story. Then came Call Me Number 1.
I dream about I will be getting up and I
The title almost sounds like a joke history wrote for them. In 1969, the self-written single reached number 2 in the UK. Not number 1, but close enough to feel like proof. The band could write its own material and still sell records. For a group trying to escape the soft pop box, that mattered. But success can be a dangerous teacher. Instead of simply opening a new door, Call Me Number 1 encouraged the band to push harder. They moved away from the easy hit factory approach and announced a heavier direction. The sound became more ambitious. The image tried to grow up. The group wanted listeners to hear them as a real band with ideas, not just a friendly harmony act from the previous wave. There is nothing wrong with that. Every artist wants room to change. The problem was timing. By then, British music was packed with groups that already owned the heavier lane. The audience that loved the Tremeloes loved them for melody, sweetness, and pop brightness. When the band tried to turn serious, some fans did not follow. The new audience they hoped to reach did not arrive in large enough numbers either. Their album Master became the symbol of that turn. It showed ambition, and it produced Me and My Life, which reached number 4 in 1970. That should have been a rescue. Another major hit, another top 5 moment, another reason to believe the reinvention could work. But the bigger tide was moving against them. The band had tried to escape being underestimated, yet the escape route led them away from the people who had actually bought the records. That is the cruel part. They were not failing because they had no talent. They were struggling because the audience had already decided what kind of band the Tremeloes were supposed to be. Once that happens, growth can look like betrayal. And by the early 70s, the old hit machine was slowing down. Chapter 6. The long fade and the shadow that would not leave after Me and My Life, the chart story began to thin out. Hello Buddy reached only number 32 in 1971, and that small number says a lot. A few years earlier, the Tremeloes had been a reliable top 10 presence. Now, even when the name still meant something, the records were not landing with the same force. The band kept working, because that is what bands do when the charts stop being kind. They moved more toward cabaret and live performance, where their harmonies, stage experience, and professionalism still mattered. That part of the story is easy to overlook, but it says something important. The Tremeloes were not a studio illusion. They could still entertain a room. They could still stand in front of people and deliver the songs. But the lineup that had powered the great second act began to break apart. In 1974, Chip Hawkes left and went to Nashville to pursue a solo career. Soon after, Alan Blakley also left, and the band brought in Aaron Woolley and Bob Benham. The name continued, but the center had shifted. The version of the Tremeloes that had fought back after Brian Poole was no longer fully intact. Later came more recordings, breaks, reunions, and legacy versions of the group. In 1992, Alan Blakley, Rick Westwood, and Dave Munden returned with All for One and One for All, joined by Joe Gillingham and Dave Fryer. Years after that, in 2006, Brian Poole reunited with the Tremeloes for a UK tour after 40 years apart. That reunion carries a strange softness. The singer who had left, the band that had outlived him commercially, the name that had been split in two. For a while, they were back under the same banner, older now, carrying the songs and the scars in the same hands. But the public memory never became simple. For many people, the Tremeloes are still introduced through someone else's story. They are the band Decca chose instead of the Beatles. That line is true, but it becomes unfair when it turns into the whole story. It leaves out Do You Love Me? It leaves out Silence is Golden. It leaves out Here Comes My Baby, Even the Bad Times Are Good, and Me and My Life. It leaves out the fact that the supposed backing band came back stronger after losing its frontman. That is the wound. Not failure, not disgrace, not a band that did nothing. The wound is being remembered for the wrong thing after doing enough to deserve better. So when people reduce the Tremeloes to one sentence, they miss the real story. Yes, Decca chose them instead of the Beatles. That part is true. But truth can still become a cage, because this band did what most groups never do. They survived losing the name at the front. They came back with Here Comes My Baby. They reached number one again with Silence is Golden. They stacked up UK hits, rebuilt their identity, and kept performing long after the pop world had moved on. Their mistake was not that they had no talent. Their mistake may have been wanting the world to see more than the bright harmonies and clean smiles it already loved. And maybe that is why their story still stings. They were chosen over the greatest band in history, but they were also punished by that comparison forever. They were never as big as the shadow beside them, but that was never the fair measure. The fair measure is simpler. When the spotlight moved away, they still made records people remembered. The Tremeloes were not the wrong choice because they failed. They were the painful choice because they succeeded, and still could not escape the shadow.